happens when you translate elements of a character's design into an entirely new medium. This is a process of me turning the new Arknights Sui sibling Wang into a practical tote bag. I didn't go into this trying to holistically turn the concept of Wang into a tote bag. It started more just as a design experiment for me as an artist. I just wanted to play with textures and new techniques. I wanted to use his aesthetic to make a practical item that looked cool, without actually trying to condense his whole character into the design of it. And yet, the process of making it still proved an opportunity to reflect on him and his story. I started by first picking out patterns and details from his character art that just appealed to me the most, and the design of the tote bag very quickly fell into place after that. I use tote bags often and have sewn a few before, so I have a few non-negotiables with things like size and construction. I somewhat reference the dimensions of my favorite tote bag when deciding the size of this one, and what I didn't think much about until I was almost done with this project was how much emotional weight that decision carried in some ways, but we'll loop back around to that at the end of the video. The finished bag dimensions I decided on were 15 inches wide, 13 inches tall, and 6 inches deep. With a 3-inch box corner on each side, this would mean I would need 2 pieces of fabric, each 21 inches by 16 inches for one layer. Since I also wanted to make a lining, I needed twice that. I thought that the two 21 by 16 inch pieces of fabric would be unmanageably big to work with for the technique I planned for the bag lining, but working with smaller pieces and patchworking them together would completely ruin the flowing design of the pattern. Then I got a great idea, also inspired by my favorite tote bag. Extend the straps all the way into the bag lining as a design feature. The straps will already be visually breaking up the pattern, allowing me to hide the pieced seam lines underneath. This resulted in the lining made up of 4 total pieces. The pattern on Wang's coat lining feels like a water marble design, which is something I had never tried before. A water marbling technique floats inks or paints on top of a thickened water solution. You can manipulate the colors in a variety of ways and then pick up the finished design by laying your paper or fabric or what have you right on top. I wanted to do this project without buying any new materials as a challenge to myself, so I attempted water marbling with just diluted acrylic paints and water thickened with cornstarch. I had done a successful test piece to make sure that this would actually work and be color fast, but when it came time for the real thing, it wasn't working nearly as well. The paints behaved differently on the water this time, and the colors came out much more muted as well. The final results gave much to be desired.
Okay, this one did not get very much color on it at all. This one is giving mold. Yeah, this one is definitely the best one, and that's not saying a lot.
So I decided to redo it. I think part of the issue was I probably prepared the thickened cornstarch water a bit differently the second time, but I also learned by trial and error how to float the colors better and where to place them. I played with a variety of techniques for manipulating the design on the water, and I found that blowing with a straw was by far the closest to the design on Wang's coat. This did sometimes cause other issues because the movement could make the paint sink below the surface instead, but overall these came out much closer to what I wanted than my first try. Sometimes the way I opt to recreate a design in the real world doesn't reflect the intention behind its origin or what the character designer had in mind when drawing it that way. But in this case, I think it probably is supposed to evoke a water marble texture. Water marbling is an old technique, certainly done in China many centuries ago. History, writing, and thus also ink are important to the first of a Thousand Autumns story. We even see flowing ink textures in Wang's EP music video. I thought the black to white gradient on the outer fabric would be far easier than the marbled fabric, but it had its fair share of tribulations as well. I started by applying black dye to the fabric with a small spritz bottle. I was working with both sides of the fabric touching, thinking that any dye transfer between them would be a good thing by evening out the application. But the excess dye was pooling where it touched the table, which was further exacerbated by the wrinkles in the plastic wrap I was using to protect my work area. After figuring out how to suspend it in the air, I was able to make the most of it. The pump on my spritz bottle ended up breaking right at the end, so I couldn't have made any changes at that point even if I wanted to. But I was actually really happy with how this came out. The nice thing about creating abstract textures is how little can actually go wrong. You never quite knew what the final result would look like anyway, and it probably turned out pretty cool. My only concern at this point was making the dye actually set into the fabric. You would generally dye natural fibers, like this 100% cotton muslin, in a hot dye bath, at least 140 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Celsius. I was hoping to achieve the same result by ironing it thoroughly after it dried, but as soon as I dipped it into the soapy water, dye started bleeding out like crazy.
Oh no.
Once again, I had to engineer a way to hang it up quickly because I didn't want the dye to bleed into the white parts of my fabric. After rinsing out all the excess dye, I was left with a sad gray blob. I was pretty disappointed at this point because I had been happy with my first attempt and I wasn't sure what to try next. And then when it finally occurred to me to use diluted paints like I was doing for the marbled panels, I was a bit dumbfounded I hadn't thought of it sooner. I also remembered I had a regular spray bottle I could use even though I broke the pump of my cheap spritzer. The spray bottle worked out so much better than my spritzer did too, especially since you can adjust the size of the spray. I made sure I only worked with one layer of fabric this time, but that did require working on the floor with a tarp since I had no table big enough. I am so happy with how this came out in the end. The washed out gray layer underneath the black added some cool depth to it, and I think it looks better this way than if I had done this from the start. With the outer and lining fabrics done, all the pieces just needed to be sewn together. After piecing the marbled panels together, I stitched the nylon webbing of the straps all the way down the middle seams to cover them. I was briefly cursed here because I stitched one side down, intending to measure the desired length of the bag strap and then start sewing from that point down the other side. I didn't want to cut the strap until I could tell exactly how much I needed by sewing to the end, but while distracted, I accidentally cut the strap at the marking instead of starting to sew. I had to seam rip out that strap and start anew, except then I broke my needle!
Oh god. What the?
When this many things go wrong in a row, you should always take a break from working. And it was a good thing I did because I discovered when I started again that I was accidentally sewing down the same exact strap piece I had just seam ripped out. But I finally got there in the end. Constructing the actual tote bag is pretty simple. After sewing the bottom and sides closed, you box the corners to give the bag depth. I box my projects by cutting a square from each corner and then sewing the new opening closed diagonally. You can also just fold it diagonally from the start so it closed and trim the excess, but I've always used the square method and it makes the math easier for me. After pressing down the top edge seam allowance on both the outside and the lining, you just align them and stitch them together along the top edge. Offsetting the lining a few millimeters generally makes it look better from the outside to prevent it peeking over the edge in places. The base of the bag is done, but it still needs details. I didn't really have a plan for how I wanted to emulate the effect of Wang's belts, but making it up as I went along ended up being my favorite part of the process of making the bag. I definitely wanted to have the center strap with the 2 interlocking O-rings, but other than that, I really just played around and did what felt right in the moment. I wasn't trying to recreate his belts exactly, just evoke the vibe of them. I ended up mixing in other sizes of O-rings as well. I originally intended to permanently attach the straps to the bag, but when pulling out my box of sewing hardware, I found I had some swivel snap hooks and thought it would be cool to make the straps removable. This makes it easier to wash because, yeah, I'm old and I think about these things, but it also gives me more ways to wear and style it. Finally, let's expand on what I mentioned in the beginning of the video. My favorite tote bag, which unintentionally served as a reference for making this one, was made for me by a late family member of mine. She was an avid sewist, and I inherited her sewing supplies after she passed. In the Arknights story, Wang's guilt and grief over his late sister is a large influence on his decisions and motivations. It's interesting to reflect on the ways that my loss, even if indirectly, has led to this silly tote bag of an anime man existing. Things that are left behind and how we use them, or don't use them, to affect the future.
The fact that they may leave things behind is, for most parts, a treasure.
This project ended up taking a lot longer than I was expecting because I ended up needing to redo pretty much every part of it at least once. But I got there in the end, and it turned out really close to what I've been envisioning since the beginning. I love how it turned out, and I can't wait to use it all the time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!